and color.
Perfect.
And I'm not going to gain weight from having it because it's makeup. So it's healthy in the end.
It's just sugar.
You got to think of the positive.
They're fat free. Real pizza.
I like to let them sit out, get stale, like hard, and then I like to eat them.
Like that crust on them, huh?
Yeah, nice and crunchy, little bit of pull. Well, I didn't realize when I was a kid, my grandma would make up our Easter baskets.
It looks like you got it. Did you get a haircut?
We had to go to church on Sundays, so we
Oh,
didn't get to the
that's
Easter
what it is.
baskets
Okay.
till.
That's what it is.
And they
That's
were
what it
always
is.
a little hard when we got them. So that's how the first time I had a soft one, I'm like, what's that?
Yeah, I usually always have
It's not, there's no depth to it. What
Yeah,
in the
you do
world?
wear it. Yes, you do.
No.
I try not to. I usually try to wear something.
Yes, I miss her.
Never worn.
She passed away in
Nope.
2007. I only knew
Jules, are we
my
ready?
dad's mom and my mom's dad
Ooh,
because my mom's mom died when my mom
Yep,
was
I just
12,
waved them over.
congestive heart failure,
All right.
and then my dad's dad died 6 months before their wedding.
I'm wearing a polo shirt at
So I
times
only
in
knew
the
one of each
wintertime.
grandparent.
Nope.
That makes it tough.
I wish I had
Staff
all
ready?
the others. I really do.
That's why you
That's untrue.
I died in 1975, so about 6 years before.
All right, well, good evening, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started with the work session for October 3rd, 2023. First item on the agenda is the 2024 operating and capital budget. I'll turn it over to staff.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. We have a couple of rather large items for you to consider tonight. The first being the 2024 operating and capital budget. This will satisfy the charter requirements to present this to the City Council on or before October 15th. So we're really excited about this. This follows up the two conversations that we've had between staff and council, one on August 29th and then one on September 5th about the 2024 budget, what council's expectations are, and providing us really great direction. We really do appreciate that time with the City Council. So a couple of highlights that we'll be looking at the Jackie will go over tonight. Obviously, we've got the money that you guys have put in the budget for heavy equipment replacement. So that'll go a long way in helping Public Works and the city in general provide service to the community. And then also coming off of the compensation study that was performed by Human Resources, moving that compensation to a step program, and then also going 100% of the regional market average. So, Mr. Mayor, with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jackie, and she will be able to make this sound much better than I.
Well, I don't know about that, but I echo much of what Cody says. Just it feels really good to be presenting some summary level information tonight because you've already done the hard work. So it feels nice to be able to show you the results of your decisions, your direction, and how kind of all shakes out, what the numbers look like with all of those factors included. So thank you for the engagement, for the staff that was a part of that process. I feel like we're able to craft an even more effective roadmap for next year and how our departments are structured to be able to carry out the goals that you have given us for next year. It's going. Great. Much of the same information as our previous conversations. Again, we'll just hit on those major decision points and what the numbers look like from your guidance. So 4 major goals really did come out of all of these budget conversations. And as I went through and was really trying to think about how we would talk about these 4 factors, it's really hard to separate them, which I think is really great. It's a platform for really important work that we'll attempt to undertake next year. But those 4 kind of main pillars or themes for this next year's budget are employee retention and attraction, trying to ensure that staff here feel like they're compensated for the work that they're doing so we can retain that expertise and further the mission of our departments, taking a more holistic approach to economic development and not having it just kind of be a one department process, and us all looking at how we play a part in making sure that the economic development future for the city is more robust. And then community beautification and capital replacement, even harder to separate. So much of what we'll be doing next year and the resources that you've allocated for capital replacement really do further that beautification. The better equipment, the more staff capacity we hopefully have to take care of the things that we have and keep them looking nice. So I think these are really great pillars for our budget, things that our departments are proud to undertake and things that we can really get behind for some traction, for some change for next year. I promised to show you how the numbers shake out with all of that. You'll see that big cog there in the middle. Total general fund expenditure budget, about $21.6 million in total is what the general fund is planning to spend next year. And if you go from left to right, personnel is about 13.3 million of that. Supplies and services, a little more than 6 million, and we'll talk about the major factors that go into each of these in the next slides. Capital replacements with that one-time money, 1.4 million that we'll spend next year to help with that beautification and long ignored capital pieces of equipment that we need. And then we do have still 2 transfers that we didn't speak much about, and I wanted to highlight. We are still paying $200,000 for the next 4 years to the fire district before that goes away. And then we still have planned every year a $600,000 transfer to the CIP Streets Fund for pavement management. So both of those factors are included, and just wanted to mention that. A reminder of that good hard work that you did and those conversations we had. There were over $6 million of new requests from departments. Those needs aren't going away, so we'll continue to talk about those. Cody's been very clear about our direction next year. We'll keep this budget conversation going. We'll continue to look at the needs and how we're able to accomplish them as we work on next year's plan almost immediately, which is great. The equipment, as I mentioned, we funded $1.4 million. Very much this list remained unchanged. So you accomplish this by reducing the reserves for next year in the general fund from 50% down to 40% for these one-time pieces of equipment. So just as a reminder, you know, the really big pieces in there, both the tandem axle, the single axle dump truck, skid steer, 2 additional Ventrac mowers, traffic signal radar sensors, and then a large amount of facility repairs. And in talking with Hector last week, he's doing some great work to try to see what savings he may have this year to get a jump start on this list. So there may even be new things or resources out of this $400,000 next year that we could continue to beautify, continue to do things with. So very much appreciate departments looking at current budgets and trying to figure out what they can get started and accomplish now. We were able to accomplish including all of the supplies and services needs in the budget for next year in that $6 million number. Fairly significant increase for things that we have previously talked about: Humane Society, Greeley Evans Transit, utility increases, ammunition, additional supplies and contracts that aid in beautification. All of these great things that departments were really asking for and high priorities we were able to accomplish in the budget. The payroll recommendations as presented by Tammy and as council gave direction on are also included in the budget. So we are structuring to bring employees up to that 100% of market reference point instead of the 90% that we had originally planned and presented to you. Moving towards structured pay plans for all employees, similar to how the police station and police employees currently run, including 3.5% market adjustment to the PD pay plans, and then adding 3 new positions for next year's budget: the fleet mechanic, sign technician, and then water technician out of the water fund. And I think we really made huge progress in payroll in setting a structure up that makes sense for the city, and couldn't have been possible without the good work of Tammy and the HR department, completing the compensation and classification study in-house and having that information that we hadn't had previously was just really huge, I think, to set us up for success for next year. I mentioned briefly, this is what your current general fund reserves look like after all of these things are funded. Bringing the reserves down to 40% gave you the additional available fund balance to spend that $1.4 million in capital. We are still holding $3.3 million of that reserve for future use in the police station, in addition to the $2 million that's already budgeted. Still leaves $857,000 available fund balance. So in excess of our required reserves, and the police station, bringing that down to 40%. Council would have room, one-time funding, as budget conversations continue in the spring, there is some room if there's an additional priority or something council would like to address in the springtime. There's an additional option to do that if you wish. What that looks like on a 5-year plan for 2024, a little hard to show in the summary here, but our current operating revenues are sufficient to pay for our operating expenditures in next year's budget. That is a requirement to present that balanced budget to you all. Our capital spending is a non-operating expense, so we are able to use our fund balance for that $1.4 million of capital. Brings our net results down to $1.4 million that we are using out of fund balance for next year. So our fund balance will go down from that. And I think we're balanced now with about $21,000. So we're in the process of triple, quadruple, fifth layer checking all the numbers. And so things are moving a few dollars here and there as we're making sure everything ties, but you're balanced to about $21,000 right now. So we're maximizing all of that operating revenue to its fullest. I will just highlight something that we had talked about in a previous work session. We are budgeted or balanced in the 2024 budget. We are not balanced in 25 through 28. And what you see on that net results line of -408, -502, 586, and 805, that's your operating expenditures exceeding your operating revenues in those years. So, you know, it's due to a couple of factors. One is our conservative budgeting. As later on in the years, that crystal ball becomes a little bit more cloudy. And so the assumptions we're making for next year's budget, we're much more confident of than 5 years from now. So, you know, we've taken out the reliance on anything volatile, anything that we don't want to be overly reliant on that could change in the next 5 years. We are not setting that up now to think that those revenues will be here. They may in 2025 as we get closer and we have additional clarity when, as the time comes. But as council's mentioned in previous conversations, as we look at different revenue, diversification, additional commercial revenue, you know, we'll bring back additional information on the property tax revenue and the mill levy and kind of how we compare, and we can continue to have those conversations. But it is prudent for me to point out that the budget is structured exactly the way that you would expect based on the priorities that we're including for next year and the risks that are still there in years 2 through 5. Any questions on that or general fund? Otherwise, we'll move over to capital and some enterprise summaries. Great. Capital information also remained unchanged from what we talked about. Main priorities for roads being 37th Street widening, Phase 2A, and street maintenance. A lot of dollars from all of our various street funds going into good road work for next year, trying to put that money to work. And similarly on the park side. So we're budgeted to spend almost $2.7 million of park impact funds. That's huge. That's a larger undertaking than the city has had in many, many years. Again, going with beautification and the needs of our growth and putting parks and trails in place to service that growth. And additionally with our Conservation Trust too, $728,000 of projects included in the Conservation Trust Fund. We've been holding that money for big projects and big important things as well. So we're able to do a lot of that. We have pulled at this point the restroom at Riverside Park. So I think staff's prepared. Oh, that was City Park, thank you. So I think we're prepared to come back for further discussion in the future about what that might look like. So we've pulled that out of the city budget and instead included play structure replacement at Ridge Park to try to get some traction on other projects. If I misspoke on any of those, I'm sure Efren will kick me and we can correct it. And then a couple of other pieces. We do still have traffic signal at 23rd Avenue and 34th Street budgeted. State Farm water line replacement, almost $500,000 that the road tax fund will help with. And then the police station, I did just want to mention in the budget for next year, and as you look at capital plan, we do have the total cost for police station construction budgeted for 2024. We had that similarly for 2023. Different from road projects we may start this year and we'll finish next year. We'll carry those forward in next year's budget revision. Projects we didn't start this year that we either need a different dollar amount or it's a different project or it's going to be a completely new thing next year. We've gone ahead and just budgeted as a new project next year instead. And so that's why you'll see the police station again. we really like this summary. It's hard to see so many projects that overlap funding sources and have all of the funds at a glance. So we are proposing a little over $42 million of capital projects next year. That's pretty huge. And granted, 20 million of that is the police station, but that means over half isn't. So a lot of really big projects next year. Hope Mark's ready.
Mark.
He's ready now, no.
He's like on it.
I know.
He's like, I'm on
Always.
it.
And then on the enterprise funds, I did just want to mention, there will be conversation forthcoming with City Council about utility rates. That's the one piece you haven't done yet. We'll be taking rate recommendations to Water and Sewer Board at their October meeting, and then we'll follow up at the next City Council meeting with those recommendations from that group. So what we've done for water, wastewater, and storm drainage is built in some historical inflationary increases that match how we've approached the funds, both on the revenue side and the expense side. For those funds, if something differs from the recommendation from Water Sewer Board or this group, wildly from what we have in, then we'll correct it or adjust it in the first quarter budget revision. So don't feel like you're tied today to water rates. You haven't had a chance to have that conversation yet, and you will. So not a whole lot to talk about on the water fund yet. We're working through the water rate study with FCS Group. They've identified very large dollar amount of revenue requirements for that fund. And so now they're in the stage of trying to look at what's the proper paying source, pay classifications for the various water components. So we don't have recommendations yet from that. So we've currently just built in a 3% increase to Greeley's water treatment costs. Again, until we hear otherwise, they didn't have final decision made at the time we plugged in our estimates. So once we get that from them, we'll definitely true that up if we need to. Reminder on the water fund, we are accumulating reserves in that fund for system major maintenance, capital projects like NISP, and future potential needs like the Greeley system expansion. So there is a large cash balance in the water fund, but those are very large necessary components that we're holding funds for. We are anticipating spending a little bit more in capital costs next year for the water fund than we have historically. So anticipating using a little bit of fund balance, about $115,000 in the water fund to accomplish those next year. You can see some pretty large items there. One being our annual participation cost with NISP next year is $900,000. And then with water line replacements, doing a lead and copper inventory project, purchasing the utility potholing vacuuming trailer that we had conversation with, and a couple of AMP costs, as well as the one new water technician are the main new pieces that the water fund is incorporating for next year. On the wastewater fund, we've learned a couple of really interesting things, and I won't get into too much detail. I'm excited about this stuff, but what we're seeing is a lot of water conservation, wet years, less water usage, which is really great. What that means is less wastewater revenue as well. So inflationary costs are exceeding higher than some of the assumptions from when they did the rate study on wastewater, and consumption is down. That is the basis of our wastewater charges. Water in, water out. So what we're finding on the wastewater plant and in this fund is that the inflationary costs in that rate study aren't sufficient to keep up with what our true cost of service is. So we'll talk in more detail, but we will be recommending an inflationary increase to wastewater, and we didn't last year, so there wasn't an increase in this fund to continue to pay for just the general operations. They have a large number of capital projects in the wastewater fund for next year as well. $2 million for State Street Sewer, $1 million to start dewatering and solids handling for the expansion, as well as some of the annual sewer line maintenance and solids handling and dewatering. They had one additional truck that was requested in the asset management plan that should have been replaced 2 years ago and hasn't yet. So we do have funding to be able to do that in next year's budget. And then lastly, on the storm drainage fund, we've looked each year at a small inflationary increase, small dollar amount, large percentage, I should say, of the storm drainage rate to help start to accumulate funds for major maintenance and capital projects. So we'll be continuing that again, what we're seeing again with capital inflation is those costs to repair those items are more costly than we're able to keep up with if we're not raising the rates to get the funds in to do that. So we'll be recommending similar to that historic for next year. The storm drainage fund also did have an increase of additional supplies and services of about $82,000. So what staff's been able to do in the last few months in that beautification and cleanup kind of mindset will take some resources to continue. So that has been included in the expenses for the storm drainage fund. In large projects there, as we finish through the East Side Storm Drainage Project and have some of the additional locations of storm drainage improvements to be made, there are a number of things that are popping up as high priority that we are not able to incorporate into the budget yet. Maybe we will when we talk more about user rates, but too premature with available funding to include many of them into next year's budget, although I think the list probably grows every single day. On the non-operating funds, the things that we haven't really talked about, although many of these capital projects that are included in these various funds were on some of the other capital slides. Really just showing that all of our funds are either accumulating additional funds for a future capital project or utilizing the funds that we have now as we have priority projects. You'll see the CIP streets there using a little more than $1 million of that fund. So trying to put resources to work as those priorities are there and we're able. So with that, be happy to answer any questions that we may not have covered or anything that you were hoping to see in the budget, want to make sure was included, or any other pieces about the process. Happy to talk about it. When we come back on the 17th, we'll have resolution and ordinance for your consideration to adopt the budget. And at that time, we'll have our budget book and the line item budget details so you can see every dollar and what account it goes to.
Jackie, I have a question for you. Can you go back to the Parks Capital Project slide?
Absolutely.
I have a question regarding Da Vinci Park completion. So, if my memory serves me correctly, a couple of years ago, we actually had a discussion about Da Vinci Park, and there was this design that was brought to us that we kind of greatly scaled back because the original cost was upwards $500,000. Mm-hmm. And we scaled the project down to make it more affordable, which was in about the $350,000 to maybe $400,000 range. And I thought a couple of years ago that we were brought something before council to approve that park design and construction. So I'm kind of curious of whatever happened to that, because we're adding $302,000 to bring the total budget to $650,000, but the intent of the council at that time was we didn't want to spend that much for the park, and that's why we greatly scaled it back. So I'm just kind of curious of how it's gone from a couple of years ago where it was only $3-something to now nothing's been done, and now we're at $650,000. I'm just kind of baffled where that all went.
Fair question. I'm glad Efren's here.
So when we put that park out to bid, it came back at $500,000. What we ended up doing was going to the lowest bidder and asking them to value engineer it. They brought it down to, I want to say $250,000. I can't remember the exact number, but they brought it down. But what they did was there is 10% of turf grass. Inside is all native, the shaggy, tall stuff. And then they removed a bunch of the components that made that park a unique park. That was the last that was brought to previous assistant city manager. And then from there, I don't know what was brought to city council. And so what I did, not wanting to go that route, because all the grass inside there is going to be the tall, shaggy stuff that nobody likes or wants. And so then I brought it to city manager, and we came up with, well, I don't know if we came up with, but we talked about it, and we were going to bring it back to you, city council, and to see what it was that you wanted to do exactly on that park, because I don't think you'll be happy with the design that's there now. What was scaled back and value engineered was not what I would like to see there. So I don't know that you all would want to see that there. So that's why, if we were to build what should be there, which was the original with the Whoopie bike trail, a slanted scooter addition to the trail, and the pavilions were removed, so we'd be putting pavilions back on there. My estimate was $650,000 to bring all of that back now at today's cost. So not just the $500,000 that was quoted through the bid process, but probably going to be more substantial now.
Because I thought, and please anybody correct me if I'm wrong, I thought we had a design plan that was originally something like you just mentioned, and we're like, we don't really know if we need anything that elaborate over there. And we kind of scaled it down, and I thought the cost was in that 350, maybe 400 tops range. I just kind of want to know whatever happened to that plan and where that money that we supposedly approved for it kind of.
Well, the money's still there.
Okay.
We didn't spend it. But the design is something that we need to bring back to you, see if you all are okay with that.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I believe with the cash carryover budget revision number 1 back in the May-June timeframe, I believe there was $148,000 added at that time to bring the total project fund to $348,000, which would have been the June timeframe of this year. I have a copy of some redline copies of a design that, as Efren mentioned, removes a lot of the features from that park. My intent has been to get us through the budget season and then have a work session so City Council can take a look at what has been designed to this point to see if this is something that you guys approve of, or if there's something that we need to go back to the designers and figure out what is it that you guys want to see in a park.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I do remember the original cost and then the original immediate increase in costs, and thinking, did we just do a piss poor job of getting an original proposal, or did we do back of the napkin? Because it was such a huge variance. It wasn't like, oh, it's 20% higher due to A, B, and C. It was exponentially higher, like more than a reasonable explanation could form. And at that point, I think the explanation that council did receive was that it was cost of materials, I believe primarily concrete and asphalt or something like that for that piece. I don't remember getting a different plan. What I do remember is everybody voting, and by everybody, I mean the residents voting on the plan that was approved. So I struggle because I genuinely don't really care what we move forward with. I think the plan that the residents approved is really cool. But maybe the residents look at it and go, well, gosh, I didn't know it was going to be $650,000. I think at the end of the day, we owe it to the residents who voted to at least bring them back into the conversation, because I don't think it bodes well that we had them vote on this. They're already all going, where is this? Why hasn't it happened? And then we're going to put something in totally different than what they voted on. I don't love that at all. So I do think it's at least worth bringing the conversation back to the public on what that should be. And because I agree, I don't think anybody's going to want native grass. We saw that fumble at another park.
Yeah.
We all are well aware of that piece. Luckily not ours, but
Right.
I don't think anybody wants that. But it's just, what are the residents willing to pay for, and what could that look like? So I think giving them some tiered options on, and really let them know what the costs are. This is the cost to the residents for parks A, B, and C, and then kind of revote. I think that's a fair option.
No, I agree. I was just kind of curious because I'm like, I remember already putting money aside and setting something aside for this. And originally the cost was where something's like, we don't know if we can, and then I see this number and I'm like, boy, that number looks a lot higher than what was originally proposed. And that's why I'm going, well, where did that money that we have or supposedly set aside, where did that go, and why are we, bringing it back into the budget again? I'm like, isn't it already in there? Where did that go? So
when we went with the park designer, their opinion of cost was exorbitantly incorrect. So that's where that discrepancy
Okay.
is. And the huge difference of the cost, actual cost, once we got bids back.
No,
So beyond, after that, I'm not exactly sure what was brought back to city council.
Mr. Mayor, if you'd like, either October 17th or November 7th, I can include a conversation on Da Vinci Park, show you what we have now, because Efren, if I recall, that was a design from the end of May, just before Memorial Day.
Okay.
So I can bring that back to you guys. I'd like to do it sooner rather than later, so we can do that October 17th and have a conversation to see what it is. Because some of the challenge is picking this up mid-project, trying to figure out, make sure whatever we're building
Right.
is something that you guys and the public are interested in.
Absolutely.
So rather than pushing it through,
Sounds good.
I've slowed it down intentionally to make sure that we have an understanding of what we're doing.
I think
Yep,
especially
sounds good.
because we had the project so publicly voiced and there were Facebook things and everything else that
Yeah.
I do think it's worth at least reinforming them as to what's happening and re-engaging that conversation.
Absolutely.
I'll bring that back October 17th.
Okay.
We can have a conversation.
Sounds good. Thank you. Any other additional questions, comments?
Jackie, on the additional cash that we have in the water fund, what are we getting a strong interest rate of return on that cash right now? I just don't know where that's held.
Sure. So everything is invested in a pool.
Perfect.
So it's
We're seeing
invested
pretty strong
in
interest
house.
rates. Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. So benefit of at least holding that right now for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Anything else? Questions, comments?
Great.
All right.
I don't think so.
Great.
You think of anything or have any questions you'd like us to address on the 17th? Be happy to do that before you consider the budget.
Great. Thank you,
Thank you.
Jackie.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Really great job. Thank you. And thank you for these PowerPoints. I really appreciate them.
All right, Mr. Mayor and Council, the next business item that we have, or the next work session item we have for you is a discussion on the updated land development code. If you recall back to earlier this summer, we had several council meetings. I want to say 3 council meetings that were pretty lengthy, but they went deep into what this land development code update means to the city, making sure we're incorporating the preferences and expectations of the city council. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Angela so she can guide this conversation.
Great. Thank you.
Well, hello. We finally come to you with a full document, which is very exciting. And thank you for all of your many hours of helping craft this document. So you'll see that we're having a work session, and this will be on the agenda tonight. I did want some time to go over Planning Commission's recommendations with you in advance, make sure that we had your confidence in going forward, and make sure everyone had a comfort level with the changes. So in your packet is a summary of changes document, and it has the Planning Commission recommendations at the front. There are 4 of them, and then three of the bigger ones. And then just a general summary of changes. So for this work session, I wanted to go through those changes to remind you to go over what has happened in all of the chapters as an overview, since this has been a very long process, gone over almost 2 years. So in our general provisions, we have updated it so that the Zoning Board of Appeals will hear the appeals. Vested rights was clarified, which kinds of things can be vested. And then nonconformity, we added a benign nonconformity option, which can be used for historic structures or something that City Council would have the right to grant a nonconforming structure extra rights, such as the right to rebuild. We've seen this in other areas be very useful if something is a particularly momentous or important to the city site, but it doesn't meet the zoning code at the time. The City Council would have the ability to decide that it could stay. So then in our zoning chapter, lots of changes happened, many at your direct influence. So the 85 overlay, this is the first step in trying to remove that overlay. So while the actual changing of the zoning on those structures, on those properties, will need a separate a separate ordinance to come before you in November, what this zoning chapter does is say, if something is zoned 85 RCA, treat it like it's I2. And so that way we haven't, when we do take the overlay out specifically, it won't be that hard to change in the code. Just to show you again what that looks like, this is our overlay right now, the 85 overlay, and the zone districts that are in that overlay. On a different measure, we'll bring to you the actual zoning code change. The easiest things to just say everything that's 85 RCO is going to be C4. So if we do it that simply, this is what it looks like. You know, we've got our C3 right around the 37 interchange, and then C4 on either side of that, with an I2 up there by the railroad tracks and the interchange, where there's been a traditionally, I think, truck storage. And it backs up to some industrial property in Greeley as well. So also camping, guest camping pass per residence for our R1 zone district for 7 days per year that they would have to apply for to the city. Otherwise, camping is only allowed in approved campgrounds. RV storage, 1 per house behind the house. Renewable energy provisions, certain criteria for solar, wind, other kinds of energy development that wasn't addressed in the code previously. Commercial vehicles like the RV storage, 1 per house off the street. Outdoor storage, we got rid of those very stringent 10%, 20% limits in the industrial zone district. While I1's still accessory to a use that's there, there is no limit in how much of the property can be covered except what's required by drainage. And mobile food vendors, much more straightforward rules that I think will encourage our entrepreneurs in town and people to do business here. And wireless towers, we simplified the permitting for those accessory towers specifically for oil and gas sites, or more particularly for gas sites, I should say, that need to communicate emergency information. So then in chapter 3, the only thing that we changed since you've seen it at a last work session was formatting. The subdivision standards, these standards, we removed a lot of duplication from our engineering standards and specifications. Lots of street-specific information was removed. We also removed a lot of site plan standards that were mixed into our subdivision standards right now, got that clarified. Now we have a subdivision section, a residential section, and a non-residential section in different chapters so that there's no confusion at all. We have had some confusion with developers with our park dedication information because it was the only fee that was not listed in the subdivision section because it was listed in Title 16. So we added it to Title 18, and this brings us to one Planning Commission recommendation that staff address this duplication immediately. They said it's okay to put it in Title 18. We see why you tried to do the rabbit trail there. Make sure it mentions that it mentions Title 16, and then reconcile those so that it's not in the code twice as soon as possible. Was that a recommendation? And then improvements, the improvements, what's required with the subdivision did not change. All we did was clarify our path for what things you inspect when, and working with our city engineer on that. So then in chapter 5, residential development, lot sizes changed the most remarkably. Of course, that's one of the impetuses for even changing the code as we have had lots of PUDs because of our lot sizes being too large with the minimums. That 6,000 square foot minimum is hard to split a townhome on. So this will allow townhomes and duplex units to be sold individually without having to create a PUD, which is very nice. The new code has frontage standards that I know our consultant talked about at length, so I don't need to re-describe that, but it creates neighborhood identity, so you can have different portions that in the future we could tie to future land use map, that this is an area where we can have dense development, or we want the businesses to, the homes to front to the street and have alleys, or this is a part of town where we want things to be more rural looking. This allows us to do that. The courtyard pattern is the shared parking areas. Conservation pattern added is something more for our rural areas that we might annex, where you can set aside maybe some river frontage and then allow the houses to be all clustered as long as there's an open space dedication. And then small format is kind of a rebranding of our manufactured home regulations that we have it for our parks. And the housing diversity, this I was trying to talk quickly so we could get to the housing diversity section. This is what Planning Commission had the biggest discussion on, and it was a really, really nice conversation. Everybody putting a lot of thinking into it. Currently, our code has a housing diversity requirement. So if someone comes in with a subdivision, they're required to have different types of homes and a certain amount of them. Right now, our code is like you can't have 30 or maybe even 15 houses in a row of one type, depending on the kind. So if, let's say it's 30, so you can't have 30 houses in a row, and then you'd have to put in a townhouse, or you'd have to put in a duplex or something else, and then you can have some more. That's how the code is written now. There's also a provision that says that that 5% of all of the lots have to be over 13,000 square feet, no matter how big or small the subdivision is. And I see that was trying to encourage estate development, but no one has used it. All the developers have used PUD, and they, I don't know that any one of them have followed that 5%. It's extremely prescriptive and exact. So the code recommended by the consultant was also, I would say, even more prescriptive in this, saying that not only that estate provision left in, but then adding in that 25 or 25% of all units put in a new subdivision would have to be multifamily. And if you put in more than 300 units, then 50% of them would have to be multifamily. And that was a big red flag to me, and I'm very glad I saw it in there. And I brought it up to the Planning Commission's attention, and I said, well, I think we need to bring these percentages way down. And they said they shouldn't be in there at all. They said, and they really had a good discussion. And yes, all these towns around us, we all have these housing diversity requirements. And they said, I think that we're thinking about this the wrong way. They said, haven't we added all of these options into our zone districts now? We've broadened the lot sizes allowed. We've broadened the types of houses that people could build in the different zone districts. The market should decide what goes there. And they really didn't like saying, 10 houses have to be small, 20 houses have to be big, and the rest have to be apartments or something. They didn't like that section at all, and their recommendation to you was to strike it entirely. No 5% estate, no 25% multifamily at all. So just wanted to make sure that that we had a discussion about that as well.
So I have a question in regards to that, because I'm also on the fence with that. And the reason why is because when it comes to housing diversity, the reason you want that diversity is because, we have different cultures living within our community, right? And it promotes those relationships. So when you have the market decide, then in essence, you're excluding indirectly to an extent specific demographics, specific socioeconomic classes, what have you, or like, you know what I mean? So it kind of creates a segregation in a sense, because if, let's say, a builder decides to do all affordable housing, so you have all affordable housing, and if you allow the market to decide and the builder to decide, in a sense, they're going to do what's more economical, where they can sell a specific, you know what I mean? So without a parameter, I find it hard to see how someone would say, hey, I want to diversify my subdivision that I'm actually building. You see what I'm saying? And if they don't have to, they won't. So it's like, how are we as a community, as a city, going to ensure that there is that diversity? Granted, it doesn't have to be 13,000 square feet, you know, but promote the housing diversity within a subdivision and ensure that there is a diversity.
I mean,
I don't, well, for me, I don't think particularly maybe a subdivision should have those kind of parameters set. Because, so we have our neighborhoods that we live in, and then next to us, we have apartments, you know, up by, and there's affordable housing further up the road from me. So I do think we have that diversity. It may not be in a particular neighborhood, but to me, we do have that. And I was a little confused. So, like, are we doing this already? You know, so for what I mean is in the Ridge at Prairie View, they're still building houses. Are 5% of those lots estate lots?
now that was one thing. I don't know when that provision went into the code, because I didn't see that anywhere in town.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. So if there's places where, like, we haven't been enforcing this or we haven't done it, I personally, just for me, I don't know about anybody else, think we're trying to get that good diversity. We're trying to get the affordable housing in and everything, but I don't particularly think it needs to be in a subdivision per
Well, and
se.
right now, I mean, I get where you're coming from. That I get your perspective. I get what you're saying, but this is like moving forward. You know what I mean? So it's like right now, the way things are, there's many provisions, many things have passed, many things have changed over time. We don't know what that looked like back in the day, and even now, you know, that provision, like that 5% is there. Was it enforced? Who knows? You know, right? And so now moving forward, we're stating, hey, let the market decide. You know, we know how the market's going. You know what I mean? So like, so as we move on, I just think, you know, for the diversity in the sense that there isn't any estate homes here. I mean, you know, there isn't hardly any. And so as we think, we have our median age in our city is 20, almost 20, I think 29. And as they start to get older, or the kids start to get older, if they have children, they are looking for bigger homes. And if we let the market decide, right now the market is smaller lots, smaller homes, like let's cram everything in. So then these families are going to decide to move outside of Evans. So do we have that diversity for those families as they, you know, they continue to get bigger, or they continue to get older? You see what I'm saying? So I just worry about, and that's the reason why I say I'm on the fence, because I worry that allowing the market to decide may change the diversity within Evans.
I think I'd rather think of it on a more global perspective than on a postage stamp perspective. So if you think of, like you said, the neighborhoods we live in, I think most of them do not have estate lots in them, right? They might have, like Tuscany has your standard house, and it does have some townhomes or duplexes. But I'm going to tell you, even then, they're not affordable housing. I mean, they're all paying more than I did for my house, right? Like, we can get into that argument later, but I think there's very little considered affordable at this point in time. I would rather think of it on a more global scale. Do we, as Evans, have, to Allie's point, the ability for a growing established family who wants an estate lot to stay in the city of Evans? Right now, the answer is no. Like, Jason and I were looking, and there was one home available, an estate lot available in the city of Evans, and then it was gone. So there's literally nothing on the market if you want a true
Right.
estate lot. If you want a smaller home, do we have options? If you want to live in an apartment or you want, I think that's what I would prefer to look at is how does our code appropriately zone? I guess maybe that's what you're saying. The zone, we have zones for estate zones. If we have that, I think we've done an ability, or we've provided an ability to have that structure. I struggle with it on such a small scale, especially because it sounds like right now we're just getting out of it by doing the PUD and not utilizing that tool anyways. So the tool is not working right now. So I'm not opposed to removing it to the scale that it's at now, but I do want to know how we're going to encourage diversity across the city as in a global perspective.
So my thought on this is, the market should determine. However, there are incentives out there for housing developers right now.
Yes.
If they took advantage of Prop 123, without the city actually adopting it, we could encourage them and bring them in to say, yes, we will partner with you so you can take advantage of the Prop 123 grants and initiatives that are out there to help you offset cost and build a diverse housing, affordable, anything across the board in your divisions. But I think that's something that we partner with the developer, but we don't require the developer, because that gives them an incentive to go out there and get the money that's out there for them, and encourages them to do it on their own, not necessarily us directing them to do it. I think that's where we let the market determine, and then let them take advantage of the opportunities that are out there under Proposition 123 to make those determinations on how they want
I think about when we went to Fort Collins, how we were looking at the density levels and the diversity within an area, and it was a subdivision, and they had smaller homes, they had townhomes, and they had bigger homes. So sometimes, for example, even like, let's say, a person that's older, they say, hey, I want to scale down, I want to downsize and I love where I live, but they're not going to be able to, because depending on that diversity within the subdivision, you see what I'm saying? So are we providing that, and not only that, we have to think again at, holistically and also future wise. We're going to have one of the biggest aging groups of people that are coming up. We need to think about that too as well. So what was that?
Retirement homes too.
Yeah, so I mean, we have to think about all of that. But in that sense,
Living is what I'm talking about.
right? Yes, this is.
I'm for deleting it and letting the market decide. It's very cyclic. We have times in history where everybody wants to live in an apartment, and then we've got times where everybody wants to move on to half-acre, 1-acre lots, and you can go throughout most cities and see that. And I think that letting the market decide and providing those opportunities for developers to come in and develop what is needed at the time is very adequate for what we're doing here.
Well, and I'll say what I said when the consultant was here, but I don't necessarily, while they thought our problem was needing more affordable housing, I disagree strongly with that, simply because I still think the problem is our median income that they were looking at was scaled so low because we don't have bigger homes for people to move into. So if you've hit a point where you're at the peak of your career and you want to move into an estate lot,
You can't.
you can't. And so
I
then
have to go to Greeley.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally am looking at houses over there because that's gonna.
ditto.
You
Yep.
know what I mean? So I have
Exactly.
to move because I would like to stay in Evans, but I can't stay here.
Yeah.
Like literally, I can't, because the houses that I'm looking for are not here.
Yeah.
And so we're moving.
Yeah, but
You know what I mean? I'm not literally moving, but it's just to give you an idea.
So if you require a builder that comes in and wants to do another Neville's Crossing or Arrowhead type thing, and then you turn around and you tell them, well, I'm sorry, you can only do half of your lot with those estates, and then the rest of them you have to put in apartments and townhomes.
Right.
Then you can't encourage that kind of a development to come in.
Well,
It-
that's-
but it's not being
that's
like
why I'm
it's
for
being it's having a
policing
having flexibility, but still, because ultimately is, granted, again, I'm on the fence. For me, it's just I want that diversity, and if we can ensure that there's there's diversity within an area being built, whether I don't know the code, but if again when a developer comes, it's it's not like we have a criteria. If they follow it, then it's like, yes, you go. But it's not saying, hey, you have to have X, Y, and Z. If it fits and that's what the market says, we're good to go. So ultimately, as we go, we're going to be building these things, and we're going to and then also our growth lines are at a specific level. We need to map out how our city is going to look, because we can't continue to grow. We have a boundary that we're going to hit eventually, and we're not going to move past that. So as we continue to fill all these areas, we need to be really intentional about how we do that.
I think we also make it known to our developers that come in here. Yes, one of the things, I mean, I agree with you on that. I would love to see some estate type lots and some
And they
estate
don't have to
type-
be 13,000. It's just bigger houses,
But
square footage.
I'm saying we encourage them to do it, but we don't force them to do it. They say this percentage has to be X, Y, and Z. I say let the market, but we say, hey, this is what we would like to see in Evans, and kind of let them decide what they want to do and what's best for the market and what the trends are.
Well, and I think what we're gonna see is what we continue to see with build out. And the developers I work with, every neighborhood has kind of a model home that's maybe in the 600,000s, and one that's in the 400 to 500,000, and then they've got townhomes, all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see estate lots. You just don't see that unless it is specific to an estate neighborhood. So I think the market will dictate a lot of that. I don't think we're going to have to worry about affordable housing. I think they're going to take advantage of that.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to just in the future consider how we could offer maybe an estate neighborhood, because I also think that if individuals are looking for an estate lot, I'm going to be looking in a neighborhood like Arrowhead, like Neville's Crossing, that it's all estate lots, right? That I don't have this big, beautiful estate lot and I'm surrounded by apartments, right? There's not anything wrong with apartments. I'm surrounded by apartments right now, but that makes sense in the neighborhood I'm in. If I want wide open spaces, I'd like those wide open spaces.
And
I'm just thinking, I
Exactly.
could do 22.
But see, it's like how do we find that flexibility, like to do that?
Right.
Because ultimately, as the market now, as it continues to move forward, that's not something a developer is going to do, because again, affordability and all of that. But then who knows?
right, I mean, it is true that they will try to maximize the use of the land
Exactly.
when they're building on it. One of the things that we do have in our pocket is our future land use map and our master plan. And we can use those tools to say, the master plan says this block over here has got to have some bigger area, bigger lots along, or larger homes, whatever, along open spaces, and then you can work the smaller homes towards the commercial center, and that can say that in the master plan. So then when the developer comes to us, we can say, you have to show us how your subdivision matches not only the code, but the master plan. So
Like that.
See, I
So-
like that. That's what I mean.
it's
as
more
long as-
conceptual. So-
Yeah, because I mean, granted, market, yes, but that's why I'm on the fence, because I'm like,
Yeah.
again, the developer is going to maximize like their space. I mean, ultimately, people want, they want to make a buck.
Fred, you've had your hand up a couple times. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just waving to Steve.
Oh,
I like it.
okay.
No,
But see, I'm for that. Like, if we can do that, like,
Mhm.
that would make me comfortable.
Mhm.
Because again, I just don't want to see the city moving, west, and then it's like, oh, let's build all these 1,500 square feet homes in these areas that have potential to have kind of St. Michael's, those 3,000 square feet homes. Granted, they're not estate lots, but they're bigger homes where
Big lots,
families can move into.
Mhm.
So.
I just will say I want a tiny home on a huge plot of land. So
That's what I say.
I know
We're
that's what she
amazing.
said.
We're amazing. That's 1.4, you got it. I'll give you a deal.
Laura has a good deal. She'll level it for you too.
So just so that I know before we go on, is it the will of the council that we delete the diversity requirement from the code, but then encourage it in the
conditions of,
master
yes.
plan? Okay, all right. So then in non-residential development, much less contentious, we have here the individual site standards were placed there instead of the subdivision section. And then planning commission, we had a minimum, actually, it was not a minimum, it was a maximum lot size for I-1. With, I think, the intention to keep these I-1 lots small for industrial development, and planning commission said that that's not necessary. They said that I-1 is more about visual impact, it's more about environmental impact rather than the size of the lot. So they said get rid of the lot, other things make it I-1 from I-2, like, you know, the noise, or, you know, you're not having rendering plants in I-1. You have different uses that are allowed and not allowed in I-1, and that's better, and there doesn't need to be a maximum lot size. I apologize for the incorrect minimum. So that was their recommendation for non-residential development. And then our favorite topic also, parking. So access and parking. Another good discussion about guest parking in residential areas. Overall, the code change increases residential parking and decreases non-residential parking, and adds some protection for people who share accesses. So currently, our code only requires you to have a guest parking space if your frontage of your lot is smaller than 35 feet. And also for multifamily, they only need guest parking places for 1 per every 5 units. And so our proposal here is that in those multifamilies, we go to 1 per every 3 units. Right now, the row houses, we're only needing like 1.5 parking spaces per unit, and we've upped it to 2 spaces per townhouse. And then needing 1 guest parking somewhere for every home, and not just based on the size of the frontage. That's somewhere in that neighborhood. Maybe it's off to the side, or maybe it's in some neighborhood parking, but somewhere in that neighborhood there's spot for at least 1 per house. The code said that guest parking the presented code to Planning Commission said that guest parking would either need to be on a property of a home or in a subdivision parking lot called a parking pad, I think, in the code language. And Planning Commission said that if the streets are wide enough, we should allow the street parking to count for guest parking. Just because those neighborhoods, they were pointing out that the neighborhoods we were having issues with parking in, the engineering, our engineer has removed the ability to make a street that small from our code options. So a new development going in couldn't make it that small. So they were saying there would be room on the sides for parking. So then we should allow it if there's room for it. So that was that. I'd
I'll
love to
just
hear
say,
thoughts.
I don't agree. I don't like that at all. And I do know I live in probably one of those pre-engineered micro street communities, because you cannot drive a freaking car down the road. Every day, I'm like, somebody's gonna get plowed into. I genuinely cannot believe a child hasn't got hit on a bicycle, or somebody hasn't been hit by a car, or a car hasn't hit another car in our neighborhood, because the problem is everybody parks on every side of the street. Yes. You cannot see anything. And I continue to go, there's a curve, I think, on Dante. You go around that curve, you cannot see anything. So if somebody's coming straight, oh, well, I better pull over until they're the 2 blocks down to me, and then my turn to go. But if you're going around those curves, you can't see anybody. I get the street width, but I also think about kind of the view of the neighborhood and what we really want our community to be. I just think it looks so much nicer when people can park in their driveways or in their garages and then park in designated parking spaces. Like I said, my sister lived in a community in Las Vegas that was like that. It was extremely convenient because they had them kind of these pocket pads throughout, so you were always very close to wherever you needed to be. I just think that makes a lot more sense, and I think it's something that if we started to implement, builders could do now. It's just my 2 cents. I cannot stand the street parking, and even if the widths are bigger, I struggle with. I think it's a safety issue. I just really do. So.
But not only that, like the corners, as you mentioned, like that corner. So if you have like a really kind of like cul-de-sac turn, that corner house has no parking at all. So then it's a domino effect because that person takes this house and this person, and then ultimately the end caps don't have parking. So it becomes an issue. So you already designed something with an issue. You see what I'm saying? So it's being, again, intentional on design. Do not have a pizza corner, house, because then that person has no one. And even their driveway, the way it's typically the drains are right there, which is terrible because the design, it's just terrible all together. And so just those kind of things that we have to consider when we're like creating a subdivision. But again, even when it comes to parking, HOAs don't have jurisdiction over it. It's, it's public parking. So we also have to think about those things because when a person buys a house, it's like they want to they take pride in, their home and their, how it looks, their aesthetics. And then you have this big truck right in front of it blocking like your home, and people take pride in that. And it's just the way it goes. It's like, unfortunately, you can't do anything about it. They can park their big truck every single day, because no one can say anything. But if we have at least that reasonable parking spots, and then hopefully a guest parking spot, then people can park there.
We have wider streets in my neighborhood, but they narrow at each end, and we'll have people park on the narrow even.
Exactly.
And even with the wider streets, we'll have them park on one side and coming down with the park on your right on this side, you still have to pull over if someone's driving a big truck or, something. You still have to pull over to make room for them. So that's why, for me, the parking, and I don't understand why people in Colorado don't use their garages. I did back where I'm from. No, it is for your car and then storage. Maybe you have too much junk. But that's not me anyway.
In my defense, we have a 1.5 car garage, so we can't both park in the garage.
But then other people, I don't know about you guys, but we have people in our neighborhood that'll leave their cars out there parked, working on them. That's gonna cause a problem.
Yep.
I have people in a certain area where I've had to let Cody know, hey, I think it's abandoned or whatnot. Like I've had wrecked cars dropped off and just left. And I'm like, what are you doing? This is not your, junk car lot here. Or they'll take their cars after a few days and move them, even though you never see anyone drive it. So parking, I'm with you. I want to remain strict on that.
Right, I don't know if you're waving or
you're waving at Steve.
When you allow people to park on the street, that allows them to put their car or truck or whatever that they're going to restore eventually, provided they have the time and the money in the next 100 years or so, and then they put their non-running vehicle in there that they're going to work on next weekend or the next weekend or the next weekend, and they park their running vehicles on the street, and they may have another car sitting in a driveway or two that aren't currently tagged properly, and they may or may not be running, but we can't seem to clear up that problem in Evans.
Well, it's cyclical because I think we had a neighbor that would park in front of our house that drives a diesel, and he'd warm it up every morning. Well, then he killed our grass from so now my husband parks in front of our house every morning. He doesn't want to, but at least it keeps our grass alive. And so now we're the dill holes that are parked on the street. I don't want to be parked on the street. But if not, somebody else is going to park and kill my grass. I get really mad, and Jason won't let me leave Nasty Grams, so. I'm like,
So-
don't park in front of my house.
So based on, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I mean, I agree. I think that we need to address the street parking issues, and I think it also has to do with how much we are allowing for the builders for the actual residents. I mean, if you're saying that
I
a
agree.
resident only has one parking space,
Mhm.
we know that, you know, it's usually one person and two others living in there. So, you know, we need to make sure that our requirements for the residents themselves on their parking is more than adequate and then in line with a guest spacing. And I still think guest
I agree.
spacing should be very, very, very low, almost one guest, almost as close as we can, one guest per household.
Mhm.
Because I just know that a lot of people are, at this point of time, are staying at home. A lot of people have their kids because they can't afford to go anywhere. They've got their adult children, their adult children's grandchildren. You know, the grandchildren are living there, and I think having the requirement, and I know we didn't talk about this part of it, but having the requirement for having adequate residential space on what they're building, and in addition to having guest space, is the key factor.
I mean, right now, our detached houses and our duplexes and our row houses all require, in the proposed code, require 2 per unit. But to Councilwoman Spear's point, it could be, I mean, maybe it's per bedroom, or maybe it's something
And that's
more.
where I'm saying, if we're requiring 2 per unit, I just think that if we
Not enough.
allowed for 3, meaning 2 per unit plus 1 guest space,
Mhm.
and whether that is, and I agree with off the street. So if it's allowable on their property to have, you know, another space, you know, for the 3 cars, or if they design into it the park and walk
Mhm.
things, and it works really. I seem to think it works really good, although I do not live there. But we do this in the mobile home park,
Mhm.
where it's very, very tiny, and they have a space for 1 vehicle, and then they've got a row where your guests or your extra vehicles can park, and then yes, you do have to walk in the whole 100 foot to the home.
Mhm.
So as long as we've got 2 per home and then allowing for 1, and I think that's a big increase in the number than what you had in there originally,
Yeah.
which was 1 per every 3 or so.
Right.
Yeah.
I would agree with that, what Councilmember Spear just said.
Quickly, I know we're in
I know.
it's just really fast. So Tammy's Apartments,
Mhm.
they have a strict parking guideline. So all her tenants that have extra cars come across the street to our subdivision. So they take up the parking, right?
Or their guests come across
Or the
because
guests
they
come
get
across.
towed on the weekends.
So also it's just looking at it's just not just residential, but just in general, everyone. So now that they're building apartments, have a pad for your guest.
Well, we
You know
have
what I mean?
spots,
Yeah, we-
we have
Across
spots
the
for
board.
guests, they just can't be on site on the weekends because the tenants that live there were complaining, well, there's no parking on the weekends, everybody's having a party, or everybody's having a get-together, everybody's doing the, so we don't have anywhere to park. I understand, fine, we'll go to permit parking. We go to that, but then like you, it spills over into the neighborhoods,
So,
so.
so we don't go too far off topic. Is there anything then we want to change on that? Remove from that? Or we want to leave it as is regarding the parking that's on there now?
You need to increase requirement for.
I agree with the
Increase.
increase requirement.
Increase
I
requirements.
agree
So-
with that.
Right. During our last work session, we did increase it to that 2 units of regular parking. 2 parking spaces per unit plus the 1 guest parking per unit, which could be off-site at some other little pad. We also increased, I believe, the multi-family dwelling requirements. We said that is off of the bedrooms, kind of. So it's 1.5 if it's a 1 bedroom, 1.75 if it's 2 bedroom, If it's a 3-bedroom apartment, you have to have 2 spaces. If it's a 4+ bedroom, then you have to have 3 parking spaces, and then up to that guest parking from one per 5 to 1 per 3. So if that's still how you'd like it, then we can leave it that way, and we can strike the recommended that on-street, that guest parking could be on-street.
Yeah, I don't want it to be on.
Everybody want to strike the street parking if allowed, the street's bright enough, okay, we'll strike that, and everybody good on what the increases were that she just mentioned?
I guess my only question would be, Tammy, on your, based on your depth of knowledge of the apartments, how many apartments do you see that are multiple adults? Like I think about when I lived in college, and if I had a 3-bedroom apartment, we had at least 3 adults living there versus families.
So we give 1 permit per person on the lease. So if you have 6 people on the lease, they get 6 permits. But we tell them parking is first come, first serve. Most of the time, I don't see any issues. Where it becomes a problem is, again, parents with kids that can drive. Their kids are not old enough to be on the lease, so we don't give them a permit. So they either have to get a garage or park on the street.
They don't have.
We don't allow guest parking or, extra parking. Yeah, good luck to the kids. But, and that's not to be mean, that's just always been what the lease allows. Now, I don't know with the new build, if they have required number of parking spots, and if so, has someone checked that? But I know with the old property, I don't know if we met any standards, and maybe that's why we have to be a little stricter with the parking. Cause I don't know if you guys have ever driven by, but it's full on the weekends especially.
And I wonder if we don't do like 1 bedroom would be 2 spaces, because you think of a married couple or something. 2-bedroom is 2 spaces. I don't remember what it went to from 3-bedroom, but that might actually help to create some balance, because not every 3-bedroom is going to have 3 cars.
Right.
But maybe a decent amount of 1-bedrooms will have 2 cars. So I think we can maybe create a little more balance there. I think 1 should have 2, 2 should have 2.
I agree.
And 3, I don't remember what our requirement was for 3. Because it was
what
weird
was
half cars micro cars.
A 3-bedroom right now is 2, but you could say
Could we do
2.5
like 2.5
even?
Or 2 3/4? I know.
Because
I
I
don't know.
think 3,
I'm
I'm like, how can you
saying
building, at least
more
if you're
than 2.
building that many units, you have to have that many spaces, because you're gonna have 2 bedrooms that are only two drivers. You're gonna have 2 bedrooms that if it's parents and a child who drives, you might have 3 drivers. So maybe that could help with that
So
piece.
1 and 2 bedrooms, 2 spaces, 3 bedrooms,
Should have
2.5?
3.
3.
Or 3?
You can't have a half. You have to have 3.
And
Well,
They
but
could
it's
park their
based on
park their
4 units.
motorbike
It's not
there.
gonna have
Do you
a
want it on
Hardee's.
3+ to have 3 per unit? I don't know how many
3 plus, 3 per
5-bedroom
unit.
apartments there are.
There isn't. Any
Yeah.
5-bedroom.
Haven't
No,
seen any if
3
there are.
3 plus 3.
How many 4-bedroom apartments are there though?
There's
So
a
then,
few. Yeah,
then we
they're
might be
down off,
overdoing it though.
Prairie View Drive, or
But if they have gas, I mean, I'd rather overdo it than underdo it. I just don't.
I think that would help.
Okay.
So, do I have so what's the consensus I've heard, or is that
2, 2, 3.
2, 2, 3?
yes.
I have changed it in the draft.
2, 2, 3? Okay,
3.
2, 2, 3.
Okay, well, and then this is more or less just saying what is there. Worked with Efren and Justine to make sure that our plant requirements were accurate. They passed. and then we have chapter 1811 definitions were just updated to match which vocabulary. We changed some of the wording, so the words in the definition section changed. And then other changes, you'll see the mobile food vendor definition was also in Title V, one of those duplication things. So now Title V will just say go look at Title 18. Chapter 9 was signs. This addresses the fact that you've had some sign special use permits for electronic signs that were kind of unnecessary. So this just changes it that any non-residential building that meets certain requirements can have one. And then Chapter 11, the only thing in that wireless chapter is the accessory wireless tower option. And so, and I think we hit all the planning commission recommendations. Just going to run through them very quickly to confirm. Housing diversity, we're striking from the code using the master plan. Industrial lot sizes, are we all okay with no maximum lot size in lot I-1? Required parking, we just addressed that. And then their recommendation that we deal with the park dedication being in 2 places in the code quickly. Okay, well, that was all of the comments I wanted to discuss.
Great
Thank you.
job.
Any additional questions, comments?
I just want to make sure that we do, like on the master plan, as mentioned, that we have what we mentioned about housing, just so that's clear.
Yes, so by the end of the year, I have to bring to you already an annual update of the master future land use map. So I'll take a good hard look at that and make sure when I bring that to you that it has incorporated that concept.
Thank you.
All right, so, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, so due to the time constraints, we didn't get to talk about the landscaping, but I just wanted to make sure that we are kind of on the path of not planting trees over or under any utilities.
Yes,
That
yes,
needs to be in there because they get big,
yes.
they get into utilities, including, you know, and they're really big, then they have to be trimmed and they look like
And
crunch trees.
then they, yeah, exactly.
So-
Right. There's there is an exception in the landscape chapter for overhead power lines.
I just know that we were
Yes.
hell-bent on planting trees, no
Yes.
matter what. And I do know,
Yes.
especially on
It's a
37th,
it's a
even the
problem in
RV
our code
park
right now.
has brand new little trees, and hopefully someday they will grow up. And going right down 37th, they will
Yes.
look like they belong to the YMCA.
Yes, that has been a
I'd
problem
like
on
to
several.
prevent that.
Yeah, that exception is in there to make sure that they're low.
So voting on this is on our regular scheduled meeting. I think it's like item number 5 with the changes that we've made, everything that staff we've discussed. Is everybody comfortable and good with going ahead with it on tonight's agenda, or do we want to punt it so you can get more time to review it and do it at a future council?
Just one last thing.
It's great.
And this might be master plan. So like even as we move forward, just to have like arts in like incorporate art within like any kind of building, subdivision or development that we're moving forward, would that be the master plan
It's in both.
in both?
So
Okay,
there's a
perfect.
section on community art in the master plan, and then this also with new developments, they can get points. They have to have so many points, and community art is one of the ways they can get points.
I know Liberty Dodge did some of it, and I thought that was cool. Okay, perfect. So it's a point system. Okay.
So
That's all.
we're
I'm good.
all good with it? Okay,
We're good.
cool. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, thanks, everybody, appreciate it. And thanks to all your hard work on this, I really appreciate it.
Yes.
Also pass along my thanks to the planning commission as well
Yeah,
for
very good.
their input as well. Glad it's finally coming together. And,
It's exciting. Thank
Yes.
you. And thank you all.
Thank you for all the work.
Nice usability.
all right, it is, we got about 7 minutes to our regular meeting. Why don't we just go ahead and start at 7:05, give everybody a quick little break.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yeah,
All right.
great. Thank you.